Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. We are at Unit 3, the cell. Specifically, the cell's structure and how those structures carry out the necessary functions to make the cell a living thing. The basic, the most simplest living thing. Now, everything we talk about from this point on, from this screencast, from this class, however you're hearing this, on in this bio class is going to revolve around the cell. It's going to be inside the cell. It's going to be how it got into the cell. It's going to be within the nucleus of the cell, which we'll learn about soon. Okay, so we're going to revolve our world now in this class around this small microscopic cell. So first and foremost, how the heck did we ever discover something that was microscopic? Well, for a long time we didn't know they existed. We just had the idea of them. In fact, the idea of cells, these smaller units that made up larger things, has been around for a long time. I believe it was the Greeks or the Romans that came up with the phrase atom. Of the concept, or having the concept that smaller units made up these bigger things. But don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, what we're concerned about is Robert Hooke. All right, picture to the right, in 1665, that portrait was done. And Robert Hooke was the first person to use the word cell. You ever wonder about that? Why is a cell called a cell? I have. It was first used in the year 1665 by Robert Hooke when he looked at very thin slices of cork. Like the cork that you put on the top of a bottle, that's actually derived from a plant, a living thing. So if you cut a piece of it and you have a microscope or some kind of lens to look at it under, you can see cells. And that's just what he did. In the top left, you see what Robert Hooke saw. Okay, not exactly, obviously, but that is cork under the microscope. And it looks like tiny chambers. Okay, it looks like it's sectioned off into tiny little rectangles. And again, keep in mind, it's derived from plant cells, and plant cells are rectangular in shape. Now, the reason, and this is interesting, he called these little chambers that he saw within the cork in the top left, the reason he called them cells is because they reminded him of the tiny rooms that he lived in when he was at a monastery. Okay, so yes, right here, right in Unit 3, we see that Robert Hooke was a man of religion and a man of science. The two have not always been as divided as they seem today. But the cells reminded him of these tiny rooms that they lived in, and those rooms were called cells, so he called what he saw under the microscope a cell. But today, we know that cells are not these empty chambers, but in fact contain an entire universe of living matter, chemicals being shuttled from here to there, DNA, organs, which we're going to learn about. Your cells have their own organs. And just one note I want to make before we move on from this slide is that look at our microscopes pictured here. Okay, very primitive compared to the ones we've used in the lab. Our wireless microscopes, our rechargeable microscopes, but it's what I want you to take away from this is that it's technology that allowed us to actually discover the cell. Even though we had the idea of it, these smaller units that make up bigger units like us, for generations, it was technology that needed to catch up to our ideas. Okay, so a little bit about the cell. There are three parts to something we call the cell theory. And again, we call it a theory because it's not a proven fact, but there's a large body of evidence to support it. The cell theory is compartmentalized into three things, three ideas that revolve around the cell, the core components of the cell. And the first one is that all living things are comprised of cells. And if you think about it, if the cell is the basic unit of life, then everything, in fact, that is not the cell must be made of cells, because the cell is the ground floor, it's the basic unit. So all living things are composed of cells is part one. Part two is that cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things. And what does that mean? It kind of sounds like the first one, but the word structure and function matter. So think about yourself. Your cells are the basic structure and function of your body. Your cells give you your basic structure, and your cells are what allow your body to carry out its basic function. All right. For instance, your liver cells that comprise your liver allow for toxins to be removed from your body and all kinds of other things to be done. If the cells couldn't do that, the liver as a whole couldn't, because it's made of cells. And thirdly, and I hope this is the one you kind of have a problem with and kind of bothers you, is that new cells are produced from existing cells. And I don't know about you, but the first question that comes to mind is, well, what about the first one? And my answer to you on that is I don't know. Nobody does. We are unaware of all the components necessary to generate a living cell. We are not able in a lab setting to generate a living cell from nothing, from chemicals. We have never been able to do it. We're missing something, to say the least. But we do know that one cell can make another living cell. So that's how we obtain cells in a lab setting, and that's how you make new cells. But to make them just from a jumble of chemicals, which is technically what they are, we're missing a key ingredient. We don't know what that is just yet. Maybe, like the microscope, we just need technology to catch up. Okay, that last slide. There are two types of cells we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. And all cells, both prokaryotic and eukaryotic, have two common characteristics. They are surrounded by a barrier that's called the cell membrane. Right here on this one. This one is encapsulated in a cell membrane. And this one over here, which we have cut in half for you so you can see its internal workings, it's surrounded by a cell membrane as well. Remember, the cell membrane is comprised primarily of the macromolecule lipids. All right, so that means the cell repels water. It means it won't be dissolved in water, which is a good thing because cells live in water. And secondly, they contain DNA. All living things and one non-living thing, viruses, contain DNA, the macromolecule nucleic acids. Now, the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic depends on whether or not they have this big center structure here, called a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. All right, folks. Thank you. See you in the next one.